Hey folks, time now for one of the most contentious subjects in all of visualization design. Let me take you through the concept of Chartjunk. My hotkeys aren't working. Ooh, that really spoils the vibe, doesn't it? I should just start calling this hotkey design studio, shouldn't I? Have you ever heard the saying, the devil is in the details? I'm wearing the wrong glasses. Talk about your detail problems. There we are. Now I can see you. Have you ever heard the saying, the devil is in the details? Well, that's certainly true when it comes to visualization. Edward Tufte, you know the guy whose book I have up here? One of the fathers of visualization, wrote his books at a time when PowerPoint was just becoming prominent as a way of communicating information. I'm probably dating myself here and making assumptions about the age of my audience again, but I'm going to assume that most of you can't remember a time before PowerPoint or some other kind of slide presenting system was used in every single speech, every single presentation. It turns out that if you give people the ability to fill up a screen with data, people will fill up a screen with data. It means you have to think less hard about what it is you're going to say if you can put stuff like this in front of people all the time. This is Chartjunk. Chartjunk is the addition of extraneous information to your visualizations in such a way that, I don't know, maybe it's intended to make them look cool. This one is certainly an extreme example, but it distracts from the message that you're trying to make. It's additional ink spilled on the page that gets between you and your intended message. For example, here is the same chart rendered without any of the crap around it. You'll note that if what you're trying to show is that sales have gone up in 2020, this is good enough, right? I mean, hey, look, bookings are up. The point I'm trying to make is that you didn't need the rest of that stuff. Here's another great example of Chartjunk. This is an image that I think it came from Time magazine originally. This is from Tufte's 1990 book, Envisaging Information, where he spends a lot of time going after the concept of Chartjunk. He attacks this for a couple of different reasons. There's so much extra stuff going on here, representing wages as these sparks coming out of a welding arc. The first thing he notes is that they aren't actually line charts. Like, these arcs don't actually show the evolution of wages over time. They're just stylized. There's only really one data point here, the current hourly wage for a steel worker. The other problem is that it's not even displayed on a linear scale. Look at how far apart West Germany, yeah, that tells you how old this chart is. Look at how far apart West Germany is at $13.40 and Japan at $11.08. Right? That's only $2 and a bit. But then look at how far it is from Japan to Korea. It's barely further on the graphic. It's only another 20 or 30 pixels. And yet that's the difference between $11 and $2.40. This graph uses these extraneous elements to show you a, I don't know, square-jawed American steelworker, but obscures the actual content it's trying to display at the same time. By the way, I think it's pretty hilarious that this is arguing that US manual laborers are paid too much as of 1982. What a different world we live in now. Then there's this truly disgusting example of Chartjunk, but also rampant patriarchy. This shows a crash in the price of diamonds around 1981, 1982, all wrapped up in the amazingly sexist example of how diamonds were a girl's best friend, but now that you can get more and better high quality diamonds for the same amount of money, she's no longer interested. We're going to leave that question for another time. This was from 1982, but the fact that that line chart is depicted as the bottom of a stylized leg with some poorly drawn sheer stockings actually obscures what it's trying to show. It actually takes a little while to try and even figure out where the chart is, much less all of this other crap. Now I want to get this off my screen now. But here's, I love this one. This one has the worst kind of chart junk that directly and literally gets in the way of what you're trying to show. This chart junk, in making this graph needlessly 3D, by the way, there aren't 4 series. There isn't a yellow one, a green one, a blue one, and a red one depicted here. Only the yellow and the red depict actual data. The green and the blue are there to look good. This is back from a time when showing something vectorized in 3D actually required extra work. Maybe 3D was cool in 1990. But let's take Tufte's words on this. A series of weird 3-dimensional displays appearing in the magazine American Education in the 1970s delighted connoisseurs of the graphically preposterous. Not Tufte's actual accent, I presume. He's a hell of a fun read. You should absolutely check him out. He's talking about how there's 5 colors here, but there's really only 2 series, and he ends it to say, this may very well be the worst graphic ever to find its way to print. And while I think the patriarchy of the previous example sticks out as well, these sorts of things sell themselves short. By including all this rubbish, they get in the way of making the point. Another point from Tufte's own words, cosmetic decorations, which frequently distort the data, will never salvage an underlying lack of content. If your numbers are boring, then you've got the wrong numbers. Credibility vanishes in clouds of chart junk. Who would trust a chart that looks like a video game? Well, come on, Ed, tell us how you really feel. Despite the fact that maybe in 1990 visualization professors were a little bit harsher on video games than we might be 30 years later, he's really making this point that extra ink, any extra detail, any extra content in your visualization that does not go towards displaying the information in its purest, simplest content is junk. But is that actually true? Here's an example of a recent chart. This is from the 2020 US election that I really like. In this chart, you can see all of the US states, with the very blue ones being the ones that polling averages suggest Joe Biden is very likely to win, and very red ones being the ones that his challenger Donald Trump, other way around, the incumbent Donald Trump. It's still years later surprising for me as someone who lived in the US under Obama to say that. The Trump was fairly likely to win. And what I love about this chart is that it shows you the tipping point, the number of electoral votes. Let's not get into the crazy US political system, but that point in the middle is the point at which the election would be won. If there's more blue snake, Biden's winning. If there's more pink snake, Trump's winning. And if the color of states that are relatively dark covers most of the graph, then that is much more certain outcome. But this is pretty junky, right? The snake layout has nothing to do with the data. It exists solely to be part of this, well, I guess there's 2 reasons for it. One, to be part of this nice little narrative about the winding path to victory and how there are many different ways that, many different states that could flip and move the snake either way. But also for the simple fact that if you laid these all out end to end, we don't have a screen with a right aspect ratio. It'd be 3 meters long and 40 pixels wide. I've got no problem with this. This is actually a really nice visualization. It was certainly helpful to get an understanding of what was the most likely outcome of the 2020 election and why. And these 538 guys actually managed to get it pretty squarely right. Here's another one I love. This is a visualization of LGBT rights in different parts of the United States. It was originally published in 2012 and then updated in 2015, and I believe there's some updated data in it since. But a rainbow is not a good color palette choice from a normal visualization standpoint. It's too distracting. It has a lot of problems with color blindness. It isn't a clear scale if you're trying to represent numerical data, although this isn't. And yet, at the same time, our rainbow is 100% the right color to use here, the right color palette. This is an excellently put together visualization showing areas of the United States clearly where there is a lot of work to do as regards LGBT rights. But this would, by a strict interpretation of Tufte's rules and the Chartjunk zealots, this would be a bad visualization. What about this one? How much chart junk is that? Isn't this the most chart junky of junks? It's got actual real live 3D animated people on what is a bar chart. Isn't this atrocious? Wouldn't the chart junk purists throw it out? Isn't that a great chart? Doesn't it do a great job of clearly articulating its purpose? Of showing a narrative, of building up to it, of presenting you with the key insight that it wants to show you, the speed at which humans have been getting faster. Given its purpose, this is a really excellent visualization. I won't have any of those chart junk zealots telling us that it's not a good piece of visual communication. And that is ultimately the story here. Chart junk is extraneous visual detail. But aesthetics are never extraneous to communication. I wear this jacket to give these videos because it makes me seem more academic. I could give the videos without it. I could give the videos in the t-shirt that I use when I ride to work. But it's necessary for the aesthetic I want to communicate. Excuse me while I ungainlily put this back on. Aesthetics are never extraneous to communication. The real question of chart junk is much more complicated. And it has to do with purpose. If you understand that the purpose of your visualization is to engage, is to surprise, is to inform, is to educate, then there is some room for not extraneous embellishments. I mean, don't do vector art of lingerie-clad women or whatever the hell that was. But to make a compelling visual aesthetic, that does require a non-zero amount of additional ink on the page. Folks like Tufte, writing from a scientific visualization background, who say that every drop of ink that you use not in the communication of your data is a drop of ink that gets in the way of your purpose, have a very narrow perspective on what visualization is. I'm not saying go wild with the chart junk. If your assignments are full of crap that doesn't need to be there, you will be marked down. Instead, I'm saying consider a trade-off between putting things on the page that serve the aesthetic sensibilities, that serve the design, that serve the narrative, and putting in things on the page that serve the data. Because if you're clever, you'll be able to find ways to add designed content to your visualization that embody, that build upon the visual narrative that you're trying to sell, but do not occlude the data that you're trying to visualize. The simple question of, does it make my mapping harder to understand, is the one that you should be asking yourself. Is this appropriate for my purpose? Does it get in the way of my mapping? So there you go, chart junk. Not as straightforward a villain as you might have heard. The devil is in the details, but sometimes a little devil is a necessary thing. I'll see you next week.